Thank you for another hard-working morning here. We had some great sessions, and now we have another treat for you. Yesterday, we were privileged to hear from former Texas Chief Justice Wallace Jefferson, and he was terrific, and you're really going to like our next speaker. It's a privilege, personal privilege for me to be able to introduce Sue Bell Cobb. She was Alabama's Chief Justice from 2007 to 2011. She was at that point one of only 2 Democrats elected statewide in the state of Alabama. She had previously had a successful career as an attorney, as a trial judge, as an appellate judge. She was a very well-regarded Chief Justice who, in addition to her case duties, was known for her work fighting for the interests of children, for court funding, for drug courts, and also I just learned that under her tenure, Alabama became the first state in the nation to have statewide e-filing, which has been very important for courts around the country. I also know from just running into her from time to time that she's worked at the ABA on children's issues and just a variety of things. Again, one of these sort of judge leaders that we run across and try to build relationships with. We first met about 8 years ago. We concluded at an Annenberg Foundation program on judicial elections, which at that point was just starting to get a little bit hot. And it was interesting because it was just after Justice Cobb had won her victory and got on the court, and you're going to see a couple commercials from that campaign in a moment, and maybe once you hear them at some point after she speaks and is taking Q&A, you might ask her to sing. We'll see. And to sort of bookend this, so I got to see her on the front end when she presented, and now on what I would call the back end, Justice Cobb, as many of you know, authored a piece in Politico in March called "I Was Alabama's Top Judge. I'm Ashamed by What I Had to Do to Get There." And this was a hugely important piece, not only for what it said, and we were privileged to work with her as she was putting it together and connecting to Politico, but for what it's doing. It is helping spread the word, and it's when justices like Justice Jefferson and Justice Cobb are able to really speak out. Judges are such terrific spokespersons for this issue, but often, as you might imagine, there's a reticence to really talk about what's going on. But as Justice Cobb would tell you, and I think she's going to tell you, it's getting so bad there's no choice but to break the silence. So we're going to see a couple videos from her campaign, and then we're going to hear from a terrific national leader.
Sue Bell Cobb was raised in Evergreen, Alabama. And Sue Bell Cobb's values, her faith, her family, shine brighter every day.
This little light of mine.
She graduated at the top of her class and with honors from law school and became Judge Sue Bell Cobb, a pioneer for women judges in Alabama history. She put thousands of criminals in jail. Her house was firebombed, but Judge Sue Bell Cobb only grew stronger, more determined. She served 40 counties, and today Judge Sue Bell Cobb decides life and death. While all those years outside the courtroom, Judge Sue Bell Cobb became a state and national leader, a reformer helping children stay out of jail, a Southern woman, kind and caring, strong and determined. Judge Sue Bell Cobb is everything our Chief Justice should be.
Liberal or conservative, you decide. He's the only judge who doesn't take money from the trial lawyers, Drayton Neighbors. The only judge who didn't give money to John Kerry, Drayton Neighbors. And the only judge who's willing to say he's strongly pro-life, Drayton Neighbors. He's the one Governor Bob Riley trusted to run our courts. The only judge with experience on the Supreme Court, a true judicial conservative. That's Chief Justice Drayton Neighbors. Keep him working for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sue Bell Cobb.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be back at Justice at Stake and to see so many other wonderful partners in this effort. David Lyle and Jill with American Constitution Society, and I want to really at the outset thank all the sponsors for this important effort. It's an honor to be here. Well, which ad would you think you'd like for people to believe, right? Those were two ads. First, my bio ad, which we ran very early in the campaign, that enabled me to just ratchet up. Even though I was a Democrat running against a Republican incumbent who had 2 to 3 times more money than I did. Those two ads were two of many, many ads in a campaign that both candidates reported. He reported 5.5 million, I reported 2.6 million, and independent groups such as the Alabama Republican Committee and others that were formed by the United States Chamber and others, spent another 2 to 3 million. So it's the most expensive race in the United States of America in 2006, and it remains the second most expensive race in the history of the United States of America. Well, I can tell you it wasn't my first race. It was actually my 5th. It wasn't my first race. When I was appointed in 1981, I became the youngest judge in the state of Alabama, and then I had to run just months later. So in Conecuh County, a little rural county halfway between Montgomery and Mobile, there I am, my daddy's driving the pickup truck, and I'm going door to door because you have a little bit of money for ads, you have a little bit of money for radio, a little bit for the weekly newspaper, and the rest of it is just retail politics. Like Justice Jefferson said yesterday, shaking those hands and trying to go see as many people as you can. Well, I'm on that campaign trail. I'm there. Stop at a little house out in the southern part of the county, and there's a sweet gentleman in the white starched shirt and overalls. This is 1982. And I go up and I say, good afternoon, sir. I'm Judge Sue Bell. I'm your new district court judge. I've been there a few months. I'm really working hard to do a good job, and I sure do need your help. And he says to me, Judge Bell, I've heard a lot about you. And I'm hearing you're doing a fine job. And I said, well, sir, I sure do need your help. And he said, well, you know, I'm 80 years old. I voted in every election since I was 21, and I ain't voted for a woman yet, and I don't plan on starting now. Well, I didn't put him in the maybe category. Okay, moving on down the road. Literally like the next little road. There's a sweet lady, gray hair. Same spiel, I sure do need your help. There's a man from outside the county trying to get my job. I'm trying to do everything I can. I wanted to come back home and serve the people of my county. And she said the same thing, Judge Bell, I know your grandmother, and I've heard you're doing a fine, fine job. And I said, well, I sure do need your help and your support. And she said, well, hon, I want to vote for you, but I just don't think a lady needs to hear the kind of things a judge has to hear. I did not tell her that was the part of the job I liked. Left that out. I left that out. But I was able to defeat the gentleman that had actually wanted the appointment, who ran against me. I carried 36 out of 39 boxes, and I beat him 2-1, and I received my first full term elected in my very first election. Well, you know, everybody's got war stories from their various campaigns, and I want to share a few, but there are a few other things that, you know, I want to talk about as well. One of them you hear me talk about a lot is integrity. Have y'all ever heard of that old story about the judge on the stand on the bench in that black robe, and there's a witness, a very reluctant witness, you know, sitting there, you know, got his looking down, kind of twiddling his thumbs, and the lawyer doing that great stuff that litigators do, going, tell the jury, isn't it true you took $500 to throw this case? And the witness is just, you know, just looking, just twiddling their, and then spin, you know how the lawyers spin? Tell the jury, isn't it true you took $500 to throw this case? He's just still looking down. And finally, the lawyer pleads with the trial judge, Judge, admonish the witness to answer the question. He said, sir, you must answer the question. And the witness jumps and said, I'm sorry, Judge. I thought he was talking to you. Well, unfortunately, that's why the mission of Justice at Stake, and really so many of all of you who are participating, is so unbelievably, incredibly important. Because it's the respect for the judiciary. It's the respect, knowing that the things that you hold the most dear are at stake, that when you walk into that courtroom, that you don't believe it's the judge that's beholding to certain people, that you believe that the judge is going to do as close to right as he could possibly or she could possibly do. You know, obviously we want all elected officials and all public officials to be honest, do we not? We want all of them. But is there a position where it's more important than those who wear black robes? You know, I was proud, and I don't know if Malia is here, with Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. Are y'all familiar with them? There's Malia in the back. I was so proud that she and Rebecca Love Corliss asked me to participate in the most unique process I've ever seen in my life. And it was basically like a 2-day committee that met to identify what were the characteristics that we wanted in a court and a judge in a court system, and then what kind of system of selection would help us secure those people. So how they did it, I don't know. They got the former head of the trial bar. They got the former head of the defense bar. They got people from is it Goldwater Institute? And then folks from National Association of Women. They had representatives from the Koch brothers. They had me. And it was an enlightening process, because really when good people come together and put every other interest aside, we really can agree on the basic things, can't we? And that is that judges make decisions, extremely important decisions, that impact people's lives, and we need them to be as honest and as qualified as possible. You know, legislators can make poor public policy, they can pass laws that do not help people, or they can refuse to pass laws that would actually improve public policy or change what would be horrific policy, just like we saw in South Carolina. But they can't take a child away. The executive branch can possibly remove a child, they can possibly close a business, but they can't do it permanently without going where? To the courts, which is why the traits and the qualities of a judge are so important, because of the individual decisions and then ultimately big decisions, you know, that impact everyone. You know, the negative impact of all this money in politics and the partisan and the hugely financed efforts involving judges have a lot of negative impact, Y'all know that. That's why you're here. That's why you've taken time from other projects in order to be here, so that we can hopefully continue to raise the bar, or raise the attention and focus on these issues. But do you know what? One of them that bothers me the most, as someone who has spent a lot of time recruiting people to run for judicial office, is how hard it is now to get fine lawyers to sacrifice themselves, risk their practice, and sacrifice their families for running for a position. Our selection process right now is probably the #1 reason why fine, competent, sharp, courageous, Malia, all the characteristics that we identified with Isles, courteous, dignified, filled with integrity, fair, open-minded, hardworking, while they don't offer themselves. I mean, why would you? You know, you're pretty happy where you are, and look what you could lose. You could lose your reputation. The other negatives, many of you know, those lawyers are looking at that onslaught of negative ads that could come. They don't want to raise the money. I can't tell you how many very fine lawyers that I've begged to run for our appellate courts in Alabama have said to me, I'm not going to raise all that money. There's just no way I'm going to do it. I mean, I don't want to, I can't, and I just cannot see myself doing it. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to. Alabama, like Texas, doesn't have the bar against personal solicitation by judges. And to really raise it, it really comes down to the individual having a big part to play and role in that. But y'all know, one of the bigger things more than anything is the negative ads and the terrible impact that has on people's feeling about the courts. The data shows that in counties where the judges are picked by merit selection, there is a higher view and there's more respect for the courts. In the states where there are more expensive partisan campaigns, it's still higher than the other branches, but it's still not as high as in the states that have the huge, large, well-financed campaigns. So it's that public perception. Well, getting back to 2006, my husband and I, my family, had made numerous sacrifices along the campaign trail. Time, effort, oh my goodness, you can imagine the demands, because Chief Justice Jefferson mentioned many of those. So I didn't know where I was going to be, because on the day of the election, I knew where I was going to be. I didn't know where I was going to be the day after the election in November of 2006, but I knew where I was going to be 2 days after the election. 2 days after the election, I was going to be driving a car full of, I believe, fifth graders to a field trip. I had signed up, I was going to be able to do it, and the second day after the election, I had been victorious. It was, people were, it was, the excitement was palpable. It was really unreal to see how many people were so excited about the victory. But the second day after the election, I drove up to my daughter's school. I didn't have a clue, Bert, where we were going. Not a clue, but I was just going on the field trip with my daughter. I get there and I look at one of the moms while they're, telling the kids the rules. We're out in the hall, and I said, "Where are we going?" And she said, "I think we're going over somewhere, in East Alabama. Some kind of battlefield or something." We're going where? I asked someone else. She said, "There's a reenactment going on at a Confederate battlefield in over a few counties over, about an hour and 15 minutes away, and we're going to that." Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd never been to any Confederate battlefield, nor had I gotten into any of the efforts regarding reenacting and all of that. But I went, okay, that's great. So we took the kids, we get there. It was new, all of it was news to me. They had the reenactors and in their uniforms, gray and blue there. We went to the medicine tent where they chop off the limbs. We went to the ammunition tent where they fix the ammo. And then my phone rings. And so I step back and say, Sue Bell Cobb. And a woman from the National Law Journal, a reporter, calls and says, Chief Justice Cobb, or Judge Cobb, Chief Justice Cobb, I just called your office. They said that you would not mind me speaking with you. Would you give me just 2 or 3 minutes? I'm from the National Law Journal. And I said, no. I said, but I'm at my daughter's field trip. I've stepped back for a few steps away. I can only give you 2 or 3 minutes. And she said, that would be fine. If you could just answer a couple of questions for me. I said, sure. I'm thinking, she's going to ask me, what does it feel like to have been an unfettered child advocate who, as the former president of the juvenile judges, is now Chief Justice and can help impact policy regarding juveniles in every realm? Or she's going to ask me, what does it feel like to be the first female Chief Justice in the history of the state of Alabama? Her question was, Judge Cobb, how does it feel to be the victor of the most expensive judicial race in the United States of America? And how are you going to convince the citizens of the state of Alabama that you won't be impacted by the several $1 million that you raised and the contributions that you received? I'm taking a breath, trying to, what in the world am I going to say? The cannon goes off. No lie. I look up to heaven and say, dear Lord, Please do not let this Yankee ask me where I am. And she didn't. But that is why what you're doing when you go back to your states is so important. So that we will have judges being able to make those courageous, well-reasoned, quickly determined cases and decisions, and that people will say, I've had my day in court. I have had my say. I have had the most important thing in my life determined. I may not agree. Many don't with what the court does. They just want to know that they got their say and that they were heard and that they got their fair day in court. And then they can live with it. Well, as I've mentioned to many, when you think about the negatives, you've seen data. I know the American Constitution Society, and you've heard some of their professors that they've supported in their research to look about what the impact is of the big money and decisions, that are made. And I can tell you that when asked the question, as I've been asked many times, how do you just put politics aside, when you're making these decisions? How do you do that? And I've said to them, that's why, I go back again, it's so important to get judges, who have that strong internal moral compass, that it's not a position of power, because you're just simply required to do the right thing regardless. I had a case when I was elected in 1994 to the first woman elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals in Alabama in 1994. And my predecessor had decided not to run against me, and then he ran against one of our great judges, in fact, the only African-American judge that we had on the Alabama Supreme Court at the time. And he had left for me a case that had probably been sitting there for a couple of years, if not more, that he did not get out. That was a capital murder case where the defendant had pled guilty to receive the electric chair. Let me say that again. He left for me a case where a defendant pled guilty and said, I want to be electrocuted. I want to be put to death. What I did was a horrible, despicable thing. Rape, horrendous murder of a woman, and I deserve to be put to death. Well, Alabama Code and those in any state, I'm sure, that has the death penalty, they have the law that basically says we're not going to have state-sponsored suicide, right? So you can't just plead guilty and boom, that's it. In Alabama, the code very succinctly and very understandably says that when somebody enters a plea of guilty in a capital murder case, you have to try the case just like that plea had never occurred. You can introduce the plea. You can introduce the confession and the plea as a piece of evidence, but you have to proceed with the trial just like they had pled not guilty. Well, in this case, the judge, it would have been nice if he had actually just turned and looked at the code, right? I mean, it probably would just read one page and that would have done it. But no, he goes ahead, tries the case. He gives a 4-page charge, which is normally, probably a 20 or 30-page charge to the jury. He gives he just totally, basically omits reasonable doubt in charging on that. But then if that was not enough, he had a 4-page charge. Basically, that's about elect a foreman, right? He gave the jury a guilty verdict only. In other words, instead of a form that said not guilty and a form that said guilty, he gave the jury a guilty firm only. So I get that case, and I look at my staff and I say, there is no choice. There is no choice but to reverse this case. It's just not even, can't even contemplate anything else. But I can not imagine what my future opponents, I can see the ad right now. Judge Sue Bell Cobb won't even give the person the chair when they're begging for it. Can't you see that? Well, fortunately, I guess they never saw that case because I never saw it ever, which is really nice. But the question is that it happens, you know, that you still have to go back and think. On the campaign trail, when I was running for Chief Justice or the second term for the Court of Criminal Appeals, I had reversed a case, a death penalty case, where the 16-year-old with an older person had gone in and murdered, lots of evidence, tons of evidence, and murdered a retired state trooper and his wife in a home invasion case. We reversed the case because it should have been reversed, and that sheriff, who had been a very dear friend of mine, rode the roads against me. Rode the roads against me. I had local people in Conecuh County. I had the chairman of the Democratic Executive Committee, a prominent landowner and farmer, had been a dear friend of my family for years, come see me and say, Judge, said, you know, the game wardens, you know, they stopped two of my guys, two of my hands, you know, worked with me for years. And I said, wait, Skip, wait. Listen, the canons say that I can't have a ex parte conversation with you, but just go back and tell them if they want a lawyer, they ought to get a lawyer. We'll make sure their rights are protected, and I promise you they will receive a fair trial. Okay, all right, thanks, okay. He left, kind of with a wink and a nod. We had the trial 2 or 3 weeks later, and they were found guilty, and they were treated just like I would have treated anyone else. He rode the roads campaigning against me my next race. He goes into my father's business and says, how much do I owe you? And he said, X amount. He said, I'll never walk in here again, ever. I'm closing my account. I'm doing business elsewhere. You know, and basically my brother said to him, you know, Skip, what's the problem? He said, oh, well, she just terrible decision. He said, well, how many decisions do you think she's made the past 6, 7 years? Well, I'm sure thousands. And he said, well, how many of the others do you disagree with? Well, I don't know, but she was wrong here, and I'm going elsewhere. Do you see what I'm saying? You know, that's the kind of intimate, the kind of personal, really feelings that citizens continue to have when judges do what? Just follow the law, follow the canons, and try to do the job, you know, to the best of their ability. Which is why we need a system in the 50 states, the 50 laboratories of democracy, that ensures that we have judges that can do just that. You know, as the time has gone on, 30 years wearing a robe, I can assure you that I've made mistakes, and I have come as close as I know to doing what I know to do to make it a better system. We tried many, many years to get just nonpartisan races in Alabama. In Alabama, in 6 election cycles, $30 million was spent. The same, I said, in 6 years, 3 election cycles. $30 million was spent to elect the appellate judges. Those same 6 years and 3 election cycles in the state of California, which is 8 times bigger than Alabama, has I don't know how many, a couple of hundred probably, appellate judges. $270,000 was spent. $270,000 in a state 8 size the time of Alabama, 30 million. What you do is important. What you do when you go back home is important. And I want you to know that I basically want you to not become weary. No matter how tough it is, no matter how difficult it is, that this is a fight worth fighting. Now, questions and answers. Who's brave enough to ask a question? Y'all have got to ask me questions. My feelings won't be hurt. My feelings will be hurt. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Someone said there was your house was fired on. Can you say anything about that? What took place?
I can. September the 3rd, 1989, I had been a judge for about 8 years, and I get a phone call from my brother, Jimmy, who says, guess where I am? I was out of town attending a funeral. I said, where? He said, I'm in your house along with the Evergreen Volunteer Fire Department. I said, I beg your pardon? Yeah, right, sure. He said, I'm not teasing. I said, oh yeah, right. He said, I'm not teasing. A person went in and threw a Molotov cocktail into, I had full-length windows across the front, threw in a Molotov cocktail into my house and set my house on fire. But for the grace of God, I had neighbors that had been walking. It was late at night, but they had been walking because it was cooler, and they were actually standing in my neighbor's sprinkler, cooling off. That's Alabama in summertime. And they saw the person throw it in and then walk off into the woods. And we really believe that no one was ever convicted, but we really believe that it was someone, we know who it was, and I won't go through all the details, but I had him in court. You know, I used to, judges deal, which is why we have to have courageous people, not only that make courageous decisions when it's politically hot, but courageous enough to put themselves in a situation where they could be in danger, that were mentally ill. So he was ultimately this person because we thought that he had done it, and I won't go through all the details. When he was released from the mental hospital, they tried to explain it to him that it would not be in his best interest to come back to Conecuh County and bother me. And they told me now, as long as he's on his anti-fixational medicine, he's much less fixated on you. And you go, oh, well, that makes me feel good. But yet again, you know, it's just an example of you just have to keep going, and you have to keep doing the right thing, because that's why the people need you. We need judges that are willing to put it on the line, you know, no matter what it takes, to make sure that we're doing the right thing each and every day. Any other questions? I say yes in the back, or okay. And there's someone else in the very back that wants to be next.
So you said a moment ago that we need a system in all 50 states that will allow judges to do what they need to do to follow the law and the Constitution. At this moment in time, what do you think that system should be?
I truly believe, and I talked to Chief Justice Jefferson last night. Of course, he and I have been involved with a conference of Chief Justices, and there are many groups that say this. I truly believe that what we need is a transparent, diverse merit selection committee established in every single state and well-balanced, thank you, have lay people as well as lawyers, have Democrats and Republicans and independents, it is geographically diverse and diverse in every other category as possible, and that they truly look at those people that are interested in serving and offer those. And honestly, my favorite thing would be for the Chief Justice to make the appointments, because who knows better what kind of judge that we need than a Chief Justice. But I think it probably would be more pragmatic for the governor to make those appointments out of 3. And then if they don't make that appointment in 30 days, that the Chief Justice makes the appointment or something of that nature. But I think that is with retention elections after that. The retention elections after that, even some say the retention, the money in retention races is ratcheting up, and we've seen, you know, difficult results from retention races. I look at my dear friend Chief Justice Marsha Turnus in Iowa. that in a unanimous decision, 3 of them that were up were voted out in a retention race because of a out-of-state group that came in and put I guess $1.5, I don't know how much, or $2 million to have ads against those justices. So we know that there can be a concern, but the people, I think, would be more likely to go with merit selection if it has the voter retention, just like the Missouri plan. Just like the Missouri plan. Yes, sir, in the back.
Following up on the comments, what do you say to minority groups that question whether a merit selection system can be fair to minorities and not operate as basically an old boys club?
What I say to them is that it is the best chance to get diversity on our courts. I believe that a merit selection system with a diverse committee is the best way to have our appellate courts look like the state that they're in. Alabama has 26 to 27% African American population. We had 2 blacks on our Alabama Supreme Court. White Republicans ran against them and defeated them. We now have a completely white appellate court system, all Republican in Alabama, and it does not look like Alabama. It does not look like Alabama. And I don't care what anybody says, appearance is important. Appearance is important. And so I would say to the minorities, you have a better chance to increase minority representation with the merit system with voter retention than you do with an election system.
Do you know of any studies or publications that have looked at that question and provide any kind of empirical support for that?
I don't, but does anybody else? Anybody? Yeah, we do. Malia? Wait, he's gonna bring a microphone.
All right, as I shared with David yesterday, the American Judicature Society did some research in 2008. We had data on all appellate judges sitting at that time, Supreme Court and Intermediate Appellate Court, and a 10% sample of trial court judges. We also looked, in a state like Alabama, we looked at whether judges were actually first elected to their seats or whether they had been chosen by gubernatorial appointment, or in other states by a merit selection, interim merit selection process. We found that a higher percentage of minorities reached the Supreme Court bench through merit selection than through any other system. For all other levels of court and for women and minorities, it was a wash. So we did not find that judges of color were more successful through elections, and we found that they were more successful for merit selection at the Supreme Court level.
Supreme Court level. Great, thank you.
How should we choose our Chief Justice?
Say that one more time.
How should we choose our Chief Justices in each state?
How should we select our chief judges? That's an interesting question. And I'll tell you why. Having been in the Conference of Chief Justices and had wonderful relationships with, all the chiefs that come from different systems, I don't know that just seniority. Alabama's different. We run statewide for the Chief Justice position, just like Wallace Jefferson talked about yesterday. Most of the courts is either by seniority or a rotation system by seniority or something of that nature. Some it's constitutional that the most senior judge, Louisiana, it's constitutional that the most senior judge is the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice position, in my opinion, really needs to have a longer period of time, even for those that rotate, and it needs to be selected by the justices themselves based on ability. Because of the 9 justices on our court, the majority of them on my court would not have wanted the administrative duties of the Supreme Court itself, much less in a unified state like Alabama, the entire state. from appointing judges, trial judges in places where they were accused, to just the general dealing with judicial misconduct, which was ever so much fun. And on down the line, I mean, getting the budget, going and working the legislature. There are just some people that are just not suited for that. I mean, they are the academics, the writers, they have those special talents that they bring a lot to the court, but they're not, administrative issues are just not their cup of tea. So I actually think I would favor that every court, the justices themselves select the person that is the most capable to lead the court. They could re-elect that person or not, but that they would pick the person that's the most able. Because right now, funding, I mean, I know in this, where I say that no tax is a religion now in certain groups, in certain places, in certain states, certainly Alabama's one of those states, the funding issues for the court system are critical. Critical. I mean, it is a huge issue in access to justice. Funding helps us be more independent and more capable to take on our very difficult responsibilities. And, who wants to fool with that? So I really think that's an important question, and I've never gotten it before, but that's really how I feel. Anybody else? We've got about 5 more minutes or not. Anybody? Bert.
So I'm curious about your reflections or maybe your observations about what you've seen in the last month or so with the U.S. Supreme Court's marriage decision and what you've seen in Alabama in terms of someone who's been a Chief Justice watching the state's culture adapt to a judicial decision that changes things in big ways.
The Supreme Court decision made things much easier for the appellate courts in the various states on this issue, clearly. I mean, it's taken away the issue, so now it's the law. And I can tell you that even in Alabama, where that issue has been a big issue of defying United States Supreme Court in the past, that Chief Justice Moore in our state has issued a statement that he will be recusing on any matters involving this issue because he had issued a statement as an administrator of the court system to the probate judges to not follow Judge Grenade's order. So he has now stepped back and said, from what I understand, that he will not be entering a decision, or he'll be recusing, which I think is important. It's important. And it's important for a lot of reasons, because that's the beauty of what system that we have, and it's finally being recognized. But definitely, anytime the United States Supreme Court will go ahead and take a case, which I think they should take more cases, not less, so that they could resolve the law, so it's not just looking at one circuit or another. We really know, and practitioners and judges can know what the law is. I think that's a good thing. Well, let me wrap up. Just one last really comment. It's a story. There was this earnest young woman who went to a great spiritual leader, and the earnest young woman said, "What is the secret to true happiness?" And the great wise spiritual leader said, "To be truly happy, you must do 3 things. 1, pray without ceasing." And for us, I think it's praying for wisdom. Pray without ceasing. 2, go home and love your family and make them feel loved. And 3, go and do what needs to be done. That's what we're asking of you. Every judge, whether they realize it or not, you will be doing the important work to protect the most important institution in our democracy. And for that, I thank you. Thank y'all.
Justice, thank you so much for letting it shine. And
thanks for not asking me to sing.
Wait a minute, that's what I was about to do. We are so lucky to have you here. We're lucky to have you as part of the Fair Courts family. The state of Alabama is clearly lucky to have you. I think the United States is lucky to have you. Thank you for being a leader. Please continue.